All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining Namely and Okta today as we discuss the topic, how to align HR and IT to streamline employee onboarding. We're really excited today. We have some great content prepared for you all that we're looking to touch on both the HR and IT perspective of the conversation. So just to start off, we really want to gauge the audience to see who we have attending today. We want to see which roles we have in the audience. So in a second, you'll see a poll pop up, and we're looking to engage whether or not you're an HR or IT professional. Now that poll should be up. Let me know if you see that coming up, and we'll have that up for about 30 seconds, and then we'll broadcast those results to gauge the audience. All right, thank you. Well, it looks like we have actually a pretty solid mix in our audience today, about half being from the HR recruiting hiring manager side, IT almost at that halfway mark as well. So great to see that we have a combination of both sides here for the conversation. Moving on into our speakers, you guys will certainly see that we have backgrounds from both sides, so this is great to see. Alrighty, so now moving on to our live events. Both Namely and Okta host an array of live events across the country, as well as frequent webinars. We have a few upcoming events listed here. We're traveling across the country through August with an event starting in Los Angeles. We'll then be moving over to Philadelphia on the 15th. And finally, fitting in with this topic, we have a presentation in Atlanta on security. So feel free to take a screenshot, but we also will be sending out the webinar recording immediately following the webinar with the links in that email as well. Alrighty, so moving on to the content for today. So we'll start off by setting off the stage as to the significance of employee onboarding. So setting the scene as to why we're all actually here. We'll then move on to delving into the risks of an unaligned process, followed by covering the benefits of actually aligning both HR and IT. And then we'll leave off with providing you all with actionable ways to do so in both the onboarding and offboarding processes. And then you'll see here, I mentioned previously that we will have a Q&A that will be active throughout the remainder of the webinar. We'll be monitoring that, and any answers that we do not get to at the Q&A section, we'll certainly send out through our thank you page and recording as well. And then if you stick to the end of the webinar, we are offering both SHRM and HRCI credits for attendees. Alrighty, so now, as I mentioned, we have two awesome speakers with us today from both Okta and Namely, with two different perspectives to employee onboarding. So I will give the floor to Aaron first to introduce himself.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So as Amanda mentioned, my name is Aaron Yee, and I work in the product marketing group over at Okta. Specifically, I cover the lifecycle management product that deals with the onboarding and offboarding of users. Before that, I was in professional services over here at Okta. So I really worked firsthand with IT teams and HR teams to automate that onboarding and offboarding processes using Okta.
Awesome, thanks, Aaron. My name is Jeremy Cosme. I'm representing the Namely team. I've been with Namely, today is actually my 2-year anniversary. So time definitely flies when you're having fun at work. So I started over in the client success division. So I really bring an interesting perspective from a client standpoint, really understanding their pain points of just a growing company, how important efficient processes are. And I joined the people team back in January of this year. So I am currently an associate or generalist on the team. I own the onboarding process, so happy to chat with you all today.
Perfect. Thank you all. And then we'll move right into the content. I'll give the floor to Jeremy.
Cool. So I was really happy to see the bulk of the participants are in the HR space. Really feel that connection there. But so us as HR professionals, we have a universal understanding of employee onboarding and what that means, but I think it's really important for us to kind of dissect it and really take a deep dive there. So I like to consider the employee onboarding process one of the most critical parts in the employee lifecycle. It's essentially setting the tone from an onboarding or employee lifecycle perspective. So the employee onboarding experience or process is an overall opportunity to really engage your new hires, really get them excited about the organization, have them understand the business, the process, and my personal favorite, the culture. It's really an opportunity to solidify that final buy-in from your new hires as well. So yes, the new hires have agreed to join the organization. They've signed off on their offer letters. They've been attracted to your total rewards package, but you really want to solidify that final buy-in. You really want to just really seal the deal and just really contribute to their overall employee experience. And onboarding is the most important step there. But before we even jump into informing new hires around our culture and procedures, we really have to, get our ducks in a row on the back end. We really have to do our prep work before our new hires start, just to make sure that they're set up for success as soon as they begin. So there's a lot of work done behind the scenes to really ensure that efficiency in terms of setting up new hires for that success, as I mentioned. And I'll be really transparent. As an aspiring HR professional, I never really understood how important the partnership between IT and HR really is. I thought employee onboarding, the first thing I think of is just, orientation, making sure they're all set, paying them, things of that sort. But there's really a lot of work that goes into just, making sure that you can even give the green light to for an employee to start. So with approximately 30 employees, undergoing the new hire onboarding process in a single month at a growing company similar to that of Namely, creating that consistent new hire experience for all employees is beyond imperative. One example that I've experienced through my tenure here at Namely on the people side, we recently onboarded a class of almost 50 employees across our offices across the country. And our core HR team is based out of our headquarters in New York. So it was really, really important to just make sure that we delivered a consistent onboarding experience for all employees across all office locations. And this would be nearly impossible without that partnership from the cross-functional teams, especially that of IT. I'll keep saying this and I'll be really consistent throughout the presentation, but I think that the onboarding process starts as soon as that new hire offer letter is signed. So as soon as that signature hits that offer letter, we've got work to do as HR professionals. So just based on that, I want to launch a quick poll just to kind of get a sense of how long are you taking to really prepare for your new hires? So how far in advance are you requesting that system access? How long are you putting into your overall prep work? I'll give you about 30 seconds. Couple more seconds. Cool. All right, so let's see the results. As soon as the offer letter is signed, woo, yes, okay, good. So you guys you won't be bothered by me repeating that throughout the presentation. Again, I really wanna just stress the idea of how important it is to really start as soon as the offer letter is signed. So we'll move forward. So I think now that we understand the overall, we have a universal understanding of the employee onboarding process, I think it's important to kind of see how the employee onboarding process has a direct impact across the employee lifecycle. So these stats come directly from SHRM. So I think the first two stats are specific to employee engagement. So it says 25% of employees are more likely to be retained at the organization due to a streamlined and efficient onboarding process. And then similar to that, 11% of employees, their performance actually improves due to a streamlined and efficient employee onboarding experience. I think this is huge. I think that, as I mentioned on the previous slide, I think you have a real opportunity to really drive that engagement and really start to solidify your core performers at your organization through the onboarding process. Around the just overall company or brand loyalty piece, 69% of employees are more likely to be with an organization for 3+ years after a structured onboarding experience. So you start to see how important that is in terms of your loyal employees and just making sure that you retain them throughout their tenure. And then approximately 15% of employees said that the lack of an effective onboarding program contributed to their decision to leave the organization. So you see the downstream impact that the onboarding process has. These results rather, come from a study done back in 2017. I'm really interested to see just overall an overall update. Some benchmarking data I think would be really, really helpful as well. Something that we can probably incorporate in a further webinar, just to kind of see the metrics or the stats across industries, across company sizes. But I think that this gives a really good holistic view into the significance of employee onboarding overall. Okay, so before we jump in even further, I think it's really important to highlight some key components associated with the employee onboarding process. So now that we understand the significance, now that we understand the overall impact, let's dive a little bit deeper. So an employee's first day, as I mentioned, really sets the tone for the new job and has them understand the goals for their first day and beyond. In order for them to have a successful first day, as I mentioned, it's really important for us to do our homework and ensure that our back-end business is in order, quite frankly. So as I mentioned, the 4 key components here that we really want to hone in on as HR professionals is with regard to onboarding, is the piece around clarification. Onboarding an employee should always come out of onboarding feeling empowered and feeling an overall understanding of what their roles and responsibilities are at the organization. Secondly, compliance, rules and regulations, really setting the tone from a compliance standpoint, having a holistic view of what the overall regulations are at the organization is really key. And that's something that the employee should come out of onboarding with. Again, my personal favorite, culture. I think that culture is extremely important, and onboarding is a way to really kind of jump right in and get employees exposed to your culture immediately. And then lastly, connection is super, super important. You want to really be able to provide the basis for a relationship with colleagues. With all 4 of these components, it's extremely imperative to build a partnership between HR and IT to cover all of these bases, especially if you want to just make sure that employees are set up for success on their first day. The partnership between IT and HR is important, but there's also some cross-functional partnerships that you want to be mindful of as well, and you want to establish. Additionally, the partnership with recruiting and the hiring manager or hiring team is extremely important in just making sure that you're hitting all 4 of these key targets from an onboarding perspective. So one quick example of how important the overall partnerships are and just making sure that you're hitting these targets. Let's say, for example, if you have a new hire start and you're on their first day, you want them to be up and running, you want them to be able to kind of be autonomous and kind of really run with their role. Let's say on their first day, they're looking to use your internal knowledge base or wiki to learn, about their role, about your, procedures internally, but they don't have access to that from IT. I think that really sets the precedent for the employee, and it's really important to have that access prior to the first day. Another example, I think Slack is a really big communication tool. So let's say, again, that same employee, if you're really looking for them to jump right in and kind of collaborate with their teams, if they don't have access to Slack, they can't communicate with colleagues in different office locations and things of that sort. So those partnerships are really, really important. The ultimate goal there is to really just ensure that the employee is set up for success on day 1. So now that we've touched on the key components from an onboarding perspective, I want to know, just based on the audience, I want to know who's involved in your new hire onboarding process at your company. Is it the hiring manager primarily, HR? Are you working with IT, or is it a partnership across teams? Give you a couple seconds. Cool, partnerships across teams, awesome. Awesome. So looks like a lot of our participants are really partnering cross-functionally, which is great. But there are some areas of opportunity with the hiring managers and the HR team specifically. So we'll give you some tips throughout the presentation that will help you, this demographic specifically. So as I mentioned previously, HR and IT both play those key roles in the overall onboarding process. It's essentially around the example that I provided earlier, where Namely was onboarding almost 50 employees in a single day. This would have been nearly impossible from a systems perspective without having a strong partnership and consistent procedures internally with IT and the hiring team. As I mentioned before, it's extremely important for the new hire to be up and running on their start date, because the process, again, does begin as soon as that offer is signed. HR really begins that experience with the input of new user data into a relevant system. So on our end, we use Namely's HRIS. So we've really set the tone for back-end onboarding because we're the initial point of contact. We're essentially the system of record as an HR team. So we want to make sure that we get it right from the absolute start. So we're the first, as I mentioned, first point of contact for all sensitive employee data. So we want to make sure we get it right. The reality of it all is that although we automate, although we have so many technology solutions, there's always going to be a piece of HR that's always going to be administrative. There's always going to be a piece of HR that is unfortunately manual. So that piece, especially the sensitive data piece, we want to make sure that we get it right initially.
And from IT's perspective, HR is the first place where a new user's data gets entered, right? I've talked to a lot of Okta customers, and it's mainly IT who's buying Okta's solution, and they always say, yeah, we get our data from HR. We don't have a repository. HR is the best source of information about a new hire, someone who gets updated or promoted, or someone who gets offboarded. And so then IT needs that information to create accounts and then grant access to applications for those users so they can get maybe single sign-on access into those apps, or so they can even just have those accounts created in Box, Office 365, and so forth. But regardless of who does what, whether it's HR or IT, the goal is the same, right? The goal is to make those employees feel like they're welcome in a modern workplace on day one, while also remaining compliant with data security and accuracy of information. So as you think about this, we want to now think about how HR and IT exchange this information. Oh, sorry. There's a poll we want to conduct. Do you guys actually use tools to automate your HR and IT onboarding? Or are you guys doing this manually? Are you guys using scripts? Do you have a third-party tool? Or is it done all manually? We're curious to see. Wow, that's surprising. So I guess that's why you're all here on this webinar, to learn about how you can automate some of these processes. Right now, a lot of the folks on this webinar are doing this manually. So now let's talk about how you guys are doing this manually. So we talked about how HR and IT need to collaborate to get that information from HR to IT. But if you think about how this is done at a lot of organizations, it's often done in one of 3 or 4 ways. Exchanging this information about a new hire, maybe about an offboarded user. The typical ways are HR will email IT, right? And these are slow and insecure ways of transmitting that sort of information. So email is pretty common. Also CSV, comma separated data in files, that's also pretty common. So HR will maybe extract some information from the HR systems and get that file over to IT. And IT then has to manually parse it, oftentimes just copying and pasting stuff from individual cells. So you can see how that becomes problematic. And then some organizations have also implemented ticketing systems where IT will maybe create a ticket and HR will create a ticket, and then IT will read that ticket and process the user who just got onboarded with all the information in that ticket. As you think about this, there are quite a few risks of unalignment, right? The first one is low data integrity, and we'll talk about all these in depth. But there's low data integrity. You've got unsecure ways of transmitting that data. And then finally, there's reduced productivity. So let's explore each of these in depth.
Cool. So thanks, Aaron. So with regard to low data integrity, the main risk here is incorrectly transcribed data. big risk here. So again, as I mentioned, we use Namely internally as our HRIS. So we really set the tone here. So with regard to incorrectly transcribed data, it's really twofold for an employee. So the first example that I can provide is just around the overall importance around capturing that data from a systems perspective. So let's say, for example, you're onboarding an employee in Namely. And this is your HRIS, this is your system of record, this is where you have all of your employee information. So let's say, for example, you have a new hire join. They're only an individual contributor, but for whatever reason, you list them as a manager under their permission scope. So this can really open you up to risk and just and exposing sensitive performance data, sensitive compensation data, and other sensitive information. So really important to make sure that you're not only capturing the employee data accurately, but that you're providing the right access on the HRIS side. Additionally, as I mentioned, it is twofold. So the second piece is around just the overall accuracy of employee data. So from an administrative perspective, incorrect data can have an impact on employee benefits, employee payroll, tax filings, and things of that sort. And after all of that, it all comes back to HR, and it creates a bigger headache from an HR perspective. So getting it right from the very beginning is super important. And then lastly, if we have inaccurate data in our HRIS, which is supposed to be our system of record, we're essentially passing along incorrect data onto other teams, such as IT. And again, that creates big risk from just an overall systems perspective.
Right. And from the IT perspective, this is a headache because IT then has to deal with complaints from the employees, who are often the first ones to catch mistakes, right? They call IT and say, hey, my last name is misspelled in this application. And so when the wrong data or missing data, like such as blanks, get propagated from HR to IT, and IT kind of multiplies that by creating the application, the accounts and the applications with that wrong data, and you just get confused all across the board, and it gets multiplied, right, with each application you create for each user. So you want to stop the flow of bad data right there at the source with HR, and so that'll prevent HR and IT from having to butt heads and unnecessarily going back and forth to correct information, which takes time away from pertinent tasks.
Absolutely, Aaron. The second risk is around just unsecure employee data and overall company data. So let's have a quick chat about around the importance of overall information security and just making sure that we get it right from the start. Information security in the workplace is not only critical, but it's essentially becoming the norm. Security in the workplace has become the standard. Employers are increasingly moving toward fundamental awareness and conformance as a core expectation for all employees. And it's also expanding. Organizations are increasingly under pressure to keep the pace from an info security perspective for competitive advantage. So you should, as an organization, the best practice is to always have a team or a member of your team who's really going to drive the importance of overall information security for all teams. So HR should not be the sole enforcer here from an information security perspective. And as I mentioned, we have to start at the source. So information security practices, yes, it's very important in the onboarding process to introduce it to employees and kind of have them exposed to the importance there. But we really have to get it right as HR and IT professionals in that we have to kind of practice what we preach, essentially. So we have to be sensitive to the data that we're transmitting over to the different teams. So, one example, if we were to email an employee's, sensitive data to, a hiring manager on another team, this would have a big impact on the employee experience, and it doesn't contribute to that streamlined or efficient HR IT partnership that we are really working toward.
And then from IT's point of view, when they think of how HR data flows into IT, they think of security in one of two ways. First, if the information about a user is missing, or maybe it's incorrectly transcribed from HR, can the user now see maybe someone else's home address in the application, or maybe worse, someone else's social security number in their profile that was mistakenly copied over? And then second, was that incorrectly transcribed data from HR, was that actually used to assign access to applications, right? As Jeremy mentioned earlier, maybe a user is meant to be an individual contributor, but if we accidentally copied over that they're a manager, maybe they now have manager access to various applications. So you need to think about that.
Awesome. And the last point is just around reduced and delayed productivity, which obviously has a bigger impact across the organization. So as I mentioned, it's really important to have the employee set up on their first day. You really want to make sure that you align both HR and IT as teams to ensure that the employees have what they need before they begin. What's really big for me, especially just as a new HR professional, is credibility across the organization, but more so as an HR organization or team. As HR, we're supposed to be the most trusted individuals on your team, on the employee's team. We handle their sensitive data. We handle their their compensation, all of their sensitive information comes directly into HR. So credibility is really, really important. You don't want to risk that credibility by starting off on the wrong foot from an onboarding perspective. So really making sure that all of the key components, as I mentioned in the previous slide, are up and running prior to the employee's start date, to just make sure to instill that credibility, to ensure that employees feel comfortable with the HR team and that their information is secured. You want to make sure that credibility is intact, and then ultimately this will have an impact on their ability to be productive from day one and beyond.
And from the IT side, when HR and IT are not well aligned, there are quite a few risks that are far-reaching. From the end user perspective, right? If HR and IT are not aligned, that end user is oftentimes sitting around waiting for access on day one and thinking, hey, is the company even giving me the right access? Are they behind? Are they slow? Is their IT team not up to snuff? On the IT side, right, they have to handle the tickets to fix incorrectly transcribed data, and they have to wait for answers from HR. So there's a hit to productivity there as well. And obviously on the HR side, right, they have to field questions from IT, and now they have to look up and verify a user's information and get that over to IT. So let's now talk about the costs of doing this manually. This is a model that we use within Okta to show customers what the cost of doing a manual process might look like. And this is for one application that a user might be assigned to. So you take into consideration a typical wage for an IT or app admin. It's about $50 an hour. And you then look at the time they spend doing a CRUD or create, read, update, deactivate event on an application. That takes about 15 minutes. So it's 15 minutes to onboard a user into an app, type in all their information, maybe go through an approvals process. Similarly, it's about 15 minutes to offboard a user. So if you divide $50 by 15 minutes by 4, then it's the cost of the event is about $12.50 to do an onboarding or offboarding event for one application. And if your organization has about 4,000 users, roughly about 20% of them will require some sort of onboarding or offboarding event every year. So if you multiply $12.50 by 800, it's about $10,000 that it's costing you in productivity hours for your IT team to actually set up an account. We did a poll. We surveyed a whole bunch of IT leaders from companies with more than 500 employees, and all of them said that the user lifecycle process and managing that is very time intensive, and they want to really use automation where possible. So if you think about that, and you think about how other people estimate costs, it really multiplies as your company scales. IDG did a survey, and they found out that these were the numbers that people submitted. So the previous slide that I showed you seemed to be pretty conservative. If you have customers that are spending 30 plus hours a week or even 60 plus hours a week doing this onboarding and offboarding stuff manually, the costs really escalate. So how can we make this better? We're going to talk about some actionable things that you can do right now with your organization to make it better. We have two options. One is better. That's not using any technology, and that's just maybe improving your processes. And then two is to actually introduce technology that can really connect HR and IT, and I'll go into depth about that integration. I'll hand it back to Jeremy.
Thanks, Aaron. So as Aaron mentioned, There are some ways that we can solidify those core processes internally between the HR and IT teams. That doesn't necessarily involve a lot of integrations or automation, and just make sure that as a sole team of maybe one HR professional, some things that you can do to partner with your IT teams or your hiring managers to just make sure that you have everything that you need. So a best practice here is to generate a new hire IT request form. So this form should be sent over to the hiring manager. Again, once that offer letter is signed, you want to send that over to the hiring manager to capture all of this information from a system standpoint. So obviously, you want to have the employee's name, their role, their official start date, who they're reporting to, which office they're sitting in. Will there be a people manager? There may be some implications there. So you want to capture all of this general data. The most important piece is the last question around what systems and applications the new hire needs. I think it's important to have a general sense of the universal systems access. So at your organization, you may have universal systems like Slack and Jira and Pure Cloud if you have softphone, for example, and your G Suite, your Google account. So these are universal systems that all employees are likely using. So you can set the tone with that question there, and then our recommendation is kicking off, depending on the team and depending on whether or not there'll be a people manager and their overall access. Our recommendation is kicking off an additional form or communication which captures department-specific access, just to make sure that you're capturing each step in terms of systems access, and again, just making sure that the employee has all access before they start. Once you have that information once you have all of that information gathered for the IT team or from a systems perspective, remember, it's really important to have your HRIS be your system of record. So you want to be able to capture all of that information and really put together an onboarding checklist of not only tasks of items that you want to be able to cover or hit before the employee starts, but also data that you want to capture in your HRIS as well. So obviously, the employee's name, there's a department, role, etc. Their access is super important. I think it's really, really important for HR to, again, serve as that system of record and really store access permissions in HRIS. The way we do it on the Namely side is we create custom fields to capture each of those access levels so that we know what permissions, what access each employee has. So that way we're able to kind of identify who has what, and then if we need to make any adjustments, we can just run a report in our HRIS. Again, you want to make sure that you have all of your technology requests in, just overall task list, arrange for the new hires ID to be up and running, and then again, just update our database internally. Aaron brought up a really, really good point around the offboarding process and just how long it takes. Again, just as an aspiring HR professional, not knowing anything about IT, I had no idea it takes so long to really disable these systems. And when you think about onboarding and offboarding, they're very critical pieces in the employee lifecycle. But with the offboarding piece, there's so much more risk there. So you want to make sure that you get it right for the offboarding piece, especially. So our recommendation here, because yes, we're bringing new hires in with IT, but we're also transitioning employees out of the organization with IT's help as well. So you want to put together an offboarding checklist to make sure that you have what you need and that IT can take action from there. So something that is really important, just really general information from a checklist standpoint: the employee's name, the end date, their department and role, whether it was voluntary or involuntary. And you want to make sure that you give IT as much time as possible. Typically, employees will give a 2-week notice, but there are instances that arise where someone's involuntarily terminated the day of. Regardless of when the termination occurs, you want to make sure that you gather all of this information. Super, super important. So the next actions on your checklist that you just want to make sure you have, a consistent communication to the IT team. So an IT offboarding email or form or communication is really key. So you want to be able to provide all of the information in the initial in the initial list above, so the employee name, department, etc. You want to be able to provide that to the IT team. And then it's really important to also indicate a delegation request as well. So, this person is terminating, this is all of their access. Who should essentially take take ownership of their access upon their termination? Include a note to finance and FP&A just in case the role has to be backfilled. Just some HR tasks like saving the resignation, exit interview, etc. And then on the IT side, it's really, really important to terminate access immediately from an HRIS perspective. Some employees may have access to other systems like our payroll system or things of that sort. So benefits, stock options, all of those different systems, you want to make sure that you're terminating them on the HR side, and then partner with IT to restrict and disable all access. Again, this process does take approximately 2 days just based on the stats. So you want to make sure that there's consistent communication and there's consistent process in terms of getting that information over to IT immediately.
Thanks, Jeremy. So just want to do a quick recap of what Jeremy talked about there. So when we did the poll earlier, a vast number of the attendees mentioned that they don't have any automation. They're doing a lot of these processes manually. By using some of these forms and using some of these checklists, you can make that manual process a little bit better because you're essentially constraining the options that are available. And when you constrain the options that are available, you're really reducing the fat fingering errors that happen as well as the copy and paste errors that happen. So you get maybe slightly better data than just doing this purely manual via CSV files or via emails or via tickets. But there's still a chance that someone is maybe choosing the wrong options, even with the request form or maybe even with these checklists. So the best option is to use a technology-based one that connects your IT systems with your HR systems. So let's go through an example of how this works. So Namely is a really good partner with Okta. Namely actually built out an integration to Okta so that joint customers of Namely and Okta can really benefit from this solution. So I'll go through an example of how a new hire process works with this solution that Namely built. It's actually it's a connector within Okta, but Namely built it. So in a new hire scenario, the HR team, the HR admin would actually create the account in Namely for a brand new user. And they do this normally, just like they would any other day. Even with this integration, nothing changes. The HR team is not affected. The HR team creates that new hire, he onboards them, and then Okta imports that new hire as well as their data and any groups they belong to for Namely. It brings that information into Okta, and Okta has all this processing logic to assign the right accounts. So for instance, if the new hire was a sales director, Okta would assign the various sales resources or sales applications such as Salesforce or maybe some CRM tools that user needs. If that user came from marketing, Okta would see that title in Namely, and it would maybe provision the right marketing resources, right? So you've got provisioned apps based off of roles, and Okta automates all that provisioning downstream to the applications, so the IT team does not have to manually log into Box, ServiceNow, Concur, and Active Directory and manually create those accounts. And then, of course, you've got this red arrow coming back from Active Directory into Okta. This is what allows us to have bidirectional sync of data. Next, we want to talk about how changes can happen. So, for instance, if someone gets promoted, or maybe they get married and their last name changes, you want all that information to propagate downstream properly and in a timely fashion. So again, the HR team is probably the first authoritative place where that change gets made. Someone gets promoted, it probably gets recorded in HR first. Again, just as in the previous case, Okta would import that change from Namely into Okta and say, hey, this user's now a manager. Maybe he should get different access to various applications. So the app permissions get updated. Maybe they can see more stuff within that application. Or maybe someone moves from marketing to sales, right? So they should get a new set of applications. Again, this is fully automated. The IT team no longer has to look through emails, look through CSV files, look at tickets. This is all done via Okta. And finally, when someone leaves the organization, again, the HR system, Namely, is probably the first place where this gets recorded. So if someone offboards, they leave the organization, Okta is able to pick up that change within Namely, and then again, deactivate those accounts downstream. So the Box account, the Tableau account, and the Concur account all get deactivated in a timely fashion.
Thanks, Aaron. Really great insight. So Really quickly, just to do a quick recap. So really great content, really great expertise from Aaron on the Okta side. To do a quick recap of the benefits of aligning HR and IT. Again, just to highlight the benefits and the overall essentially the key points that we want to hit in terms of the of streamlining the both teams and just securing those processes is the high data integrity. So you want to make sure that all data is being transcribed accurately, it's being sent over securely, and to the right folks internally. Additionally, the company will have protected data through this partnership between HR and IT, which is really, really key. Secure data, secure process, and overall education around the importance of info security is something that we also want to just kind of hone in on as well. And then lastly, employees can get to work on day one, which is what you want. You want that productivity. You want them to be able to jump right into the organization, especially these smaller organizations that really, really rely on these new hires to kind of hit the ground running. So the key message here is to just make sure that IT and HR have that process down packed and that we're really getting our homework done prior to day one. Through all three of these major benefits and the key components that we mentioned throughout the presentation, let's really set our employees up for success from the very beginning of their tenure with our organizations.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again to both of our speakers, Aaron and Jeremy, for sharing their expertise today. Now just a bit more information on the companies who actually put this webinar together. Aaron prefaced a little bit on our partnership with Okta, but to give you guys some more background, Namely is an all-in-one HR, payroll, and benefits platform created to help mid-sized companies build a better workplace. In relation to employee onboarding, so what we're speaking about here, Namely offers a paperless onboarding solution that automatically feeds new hire information directly into your payroll benefit systems. We work with some of the most innovative companies to streamline their HR processes in order to save time. So I will give the floor to to Aaron to give some more background on Okta.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'm glad to see so many folks interested in this joint solution. A lot of people really know Okta as a single sign-on company because that's what we started out as. And for those of you who don't know what single sign-on is, it's essentially a technology that allows you to log into all your apps with maybe just one password via Okta acting as a gateway. But that was a long time ago, and we've quickly evolved to create a lot of other products that bring value. And the one you saw today was the power of lifecycle management, which really works well with Namely to automate the onboarding and offboarding process for users. So we're really excited to see the interest in this.
Awesome, awesome. So if we wanted to run a poll to gauge your interest on either Namely or Okta, so if you have a moment, feel free to vote on the poll on your interest in seeing a demo of Namely or Okta. We have representatives who are available to reach out immediately following the webinar. We will have this up just for the next few minutes before we move into the Q&A session. So feel free, if you have any questions in the meantime, please input them into the Q&A, and we will move on to the Q&A section for about 5 minutes before releasing that SHRM and HRCI codes. Alrighty. So moving on to the Q&A section. Again, if you do have any questions that have reeled in the meantime, feel free to submit them, but I will start with what we have so far. This seems to be a question for Jeremy, so I will give him the floor. Now, how do you suggest presenting system information to new hires on their first day?
I think education is super, super important from an onboarding perspective. And you really have that opportunity with a structured employee orientation process. So yes, you want to give your employees a high-level overview of the organization. You want to get them kind of up to speed on the org structure, your culture, employee perks and things of that sort. But I think it's really important. And this can be, I think that this can also be tailored to different teams. So you're not, communicating system access to employees that don't necessarily apply. But just really setting that time out as either an HR or an IT team to really run through the resources and the systems that they use. I think it's valuable to not only go through the universal systems that I mentioned previously, so kind of like chat through Slack and the things, Jira and our ticketing systems and things of that sort. But again, a tailored session to really help employees really understand the power that they have to their systems access. If you're bringing on someone from finance, for example, their system access likely won't fall under a single sign-on platform. So it's really important to really stress the information security implications there, and to really help them kind of understand the importance around their access. So I would definitely say tailored sessions throughout the new hire orientation process is key.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. And then the next question that we have is for Aaron. So Aaron, we had Tom ask, can we limit the roles or people that get sent to Okta? For example, board members who do not need to use or do not need to have Okta user access.
Yep, great question. So in a lot of organizations, you can import anyone, or you can just import a subset of those users. And you really want to consider that because you don't want to give everyone Okta access or access to all the downstream applications that Okta protects. What you would do in that case is you could import all the users into Okta, not actually create accounts out of them, and based off of the role they have in the HR system, like a board member, you can then assign access to applications they need and just ignore everyone else, and you won't have Okta accounts for everyone else.
Perfect. And then if you have any follow-up questions to that one, feel free to email at hello@namely, and we can certainly pass that on to the Okta team for follow-up as well. So the next question came from Adam. What system was used to generate the form on the onboarding form slide? So I'll give that to Jeremy.
Hi, Adam. So the form that was the system that we used to generate that form was Google Forms. So that's typically the norm for smaller organizations. Kind of just have everything in one place, be able to share that data securely. But Namely actually has a feature within the system. It's the task list feature, which allows you to not only identify key tasks and essentially check the box, literally check the boxes for each task, but you can actually assign tasks and responsibilities to different parties within a specific task list. So again, through my experience on the client success team, I've had clients build this out for their onboarding process, for their offboarding process. They've been able to kind of really just enter all of their relevant and tailored offboarding tasks and be able to ping the appropriate parties when each task required action. So if you have any questions on that, I definitely, and I'm not sure if you are a current Namely customer, but if you are, reach out to support at Namely. We'll get you some insight there. But yeah.
Awesome. And then to that note, we had another representative ask a question on whether or not there was someone on the support team that could help with the integration. Again, feel free to email support@namely.com, and one of your representatives will certainly be able to help on that front as well. So the next question I'm going to pass on over to Aaron. Aaron, so Tom asked if there is an existing user in Okta that is not in Namely, perhaps it's a consultant that they use, that user's information would not be impacted in Okta. Is that correct?
That is correct. So Okta is able to have different sources of information. One can be users who are only in Okta. One can be users who are coming in from Namely, which might be representative of your real employees. Others might be other partners that you have in another data store. Okta can treat them all differently, handle them without any clashes.
Awesome. And then in order to save time for those codes, I will have the last question now that seems to have rolled in. But if there are any other questions that come through, again, I will certainly be sure to respond to these with the recording, but feel free to reach out to hello@namely.com with any additional questions. But the final one, it seems, came from Adam. And Adam asks, how far in advance does HR usually tell IT when someone will be terminating to prepare the offboarding process?
Hey, Adam. This is Jeremy. So again, the offboarding process, there's just so much risk associated with that, especially if, let's say, for example, you have someone who's offboarding who's not necessarily happy about being offboarded. So you don't want to run the risk of leaving a relatively big window or opportunity for them to kind of be able to, kind of still have access to that sensitive information. So the rule of thumb that I've used internally is as soon as we find out, essentially. So the employees manager, we communicate to managers, and we kind of set them up for success on our end in terms of giving them the tools and resources around how to handle these instances and how HR needs to be notified immediately. For voluntary terminations, I would say 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, a week. If it's a short-term voluntary, a week. As Aaron mentioned, there is a time frame that needs to be followed in order to accurately and fully disable system access. So you want to give that time. And then for involuntary terminations, which do occur, again, we want to make sure that managers are communicating as soon as possible so that we can get that over to IT and terminate access immediately.
Awesome. Okay.
Amanda,
yeah, go for it.
Amanda, can I answer 2 technical questions that came in? So Tom asked, what profile fields does Namely send to Okta? I seem to recollect there was only 5 fields. So the initial connector that Namely built for Okta was only able to bring in 5 fields. I know Namely was enhancing that to support a broader variety or a broader profile, and that should be in Okta fairly soon, if not already. I need to check on that. The second question from Thomas Wells, does Namely data overwrite the user data already in Okta? They use both, but they haven't finished the integration. It can be configured to overwrite that, and that's a paradigm that we call HR as a master. Essentially what happens in that use case is only Namely can provide user information. And so when that user is brought in from Namely into Okta, the user cannot directly change that information. That's what a lot of companies want. That's called the master paradigm. We didn't really talk about it here, but it is supported. You can also choose not to overwrite data as well.
Awesome. And then just one more question did roll in that I'm reading now. And someone asked, does Namely have a process that can send a packet with PDFs and links to new hires as part of the onboarding process? So I'll have Jeremy answer.
Yeah, the great thing about being on the HR team for an HR company is that we can partner with our product team to really make some things happen. So this is a really, really good feature enhancement request. So I think it does provide value. So we can take that to our team. No hard deadlines there or any promises, but I think it's worth kind of starting the conversations there. In the interim, though, just having a standard email template with the appropriate documents and links, and having that stored and just sending out a consistent message to all new hires is really key. So in the interim, I would definitely leverage your templates and get that consistency going.